The following is an interview that I did with the people who own Tier Talk. That's Anthony and Russ, a guy who runs a Facebook page called Keepers of Chaos. Both of these gentlemen have decades of experience in corrections, and each of them in their own way is got a channel or a Facebook page that has to do with the professional development of correctional staff. So if those are the kind of things that you're interested in, then by all means, I can't recommend them highly enough. Keepers of Chaos and Tier Talk. I've got links below in the description. I have a different approach. Mine's more to the general public. But I do know that a lot of professional correctional staff watch my channel, so that's the place that you'd go for instead of just plain stories. Although their stuff is entertaining, it's more geared to the professional correctional staff. So I won't cut up their stuff. I'll keep this all in one big interview. And if you want a deeper understanding of what it is like to work inside of the correctional environment, then this is the kind of interview that you would need to have a deeper understanding of my channel and what it is that I'm really talking about. There's the reason that I call my channel As the Key Turns. It's like a soap opera inside of most correctional environments, and this chain of command is a integral part of that soap opera like stuff that we have to deal with. Most correctional staff will tell you, man, it's not the inmates, it's the environment set by the administration. And in my experience, that was it. I wasn't bothered so much by the inmates as I was by the people that worked above and beside me. And this chain of command is integral to that stuff. So, enjoy the interview. You will learn a lot about what it's like to be inside of a prison.
First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer. All right, guys, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, I thought we could discuss today the kind of conflict between open door policy and chain of command. It's been a conversation I've been having a lot with some people that not only do I work with, but some people that I actually admire as supervisors. Plus, when I went to go ahead and post this, I did a video on this, a brief little 10-minute vlog. The comments I got really had multiple perspectives, and basically some saying it's a conflict, some say it's not. So what I thought I could do is have two professionals from the field, and we could just have a dialogue, and hopefully if things go well and we present all perspectives, we can kind of put a good end to this dialogue and not try to keep it up in the air like, unfortunately, I kind of left it with the last video. So real quick, I'm going to introduce you guys to my guest, and then when we come back from our sponsors, we're going to dive into, does open door policy conflict with chain of command? But real quick, we all know Russ Hamilton, correct, Russ?
That's right. Hey, Anthony, how you doing? How's everyone out there?
Good. Russ, a little shout out. You want to remind us who you are again?
Yeah, I'm former and now retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections, running my own little gig now on Facebook called Keepers of Chaos. That's chaos with a K.
All right, Russ, by the way, that's a great page. I see you guys growing a lot. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please check out Keepers of Chaos. It's on Facebook. It's a closed, secure group. It has a bunch of correctional professionals in the field. We do try our best to filter those that enter onto that page or onto that group. I believe they have to show that they do work in the system at whatever capacity, but we are open to correctional professionals. And as I said, just a lot of good information on that page. And we also have Dave from As the Keys Turns. He has a YouTube channel that's very popular. And Dave, you mind introducing yourself to my audience?
Yeah, I'm a retired senior officer specialist with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and like you said, I run the YouTube channel called As the Key Turns, and I'm a subscriber to Keepers of Chaos too. And I watch yours all the time too, Anthony. I enjoy your stuff very very much.
Well, I'm a big fan. Obviously, I watch all your videos as well. And it's great because I just found out that you were in the States, so I called you immediately. And it's great how successful your channel's been, so bravo. Well earned, though, by the way. You put a lot of work into it. I believe you do videos every Monday, correct? So if people subscribe to your channel, they should expect a video from you every Monday, correct?
Yep, every Monday at 8 a.m. Central Time. I guess that would be 7 or 9 a.m. Eastern.
We come back from our sponsors. We're going to go ahead and discuss chain of command versus open door policy. Kind of give us our definitions, but I think what's cool about it is I think part of our definition will be defined by experience. And I think that's cool. And I think ultimately we'll throw a lot out there, and then you guys take what you can, and it should engage in a very healthy dialogue. So guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you. Please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Plus, on a side note, Keepers of Chaos, if you can again, check out that Facebook page. And as the keys turns, obviously, guys, feel free to subscribe to those channels as well. And we're going to go to our sponsors. When we come back, got a good show for you. Stand by for our sponsors.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
And we're back. It's that quick. It's a little bit longer for them. They're gonna have a 30-second commercial for one of the best sponsors in the world, American Military University. All right, guys. So again, we're talking about is there a conflict between open door policy and that chain of command? Now, we do work in a paramilitary structure, and I know a lot of people do like to have that interaction with higher level management. And some people feel that, well, if you have that interaction with higher level management, it conflicts with that chain of command. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of back and forth. But what I want to do first is let's go to Russ first. Russ, in our system, talking about corrections now, with paramilitary structure, how would you define open door policy in regards to what we do, the paramilitary structure, and the chain of command? Again, that being a big part of paramilitary structure.
Well, there's not a lot of differentiation between the two. What open door policy tends to do, though, is gives a chance for anybody to come in that may or may not be within that chain of command. So sometimes it might circumvent it, and other times it might be parallel to it. Now, strict chain of command is a lot easier to identify because it's just who your subordinate is, who your boss is. Somewhere in there, you're in that stream.
Okay, what about you, Dave? What do you feel in our line of work? How would you explain chain of command and then open door policy? And do you believe they conflict?
Yeah, I'm really not a fan of anything called the open door policy. I think that your concerns should go up the chain of command. Now, if your immediate supervisor can't solve the problem, then of course you can go up another step. But what they've been defining it as in the Bureau of Prisons, usually the warden or the chief executive will come out and make some big speech about, oh, you can come and see me anytime. Well, two things will happen. Either he's swamped with a whole bunch of nitpicking little things, or his supervisors feel that they've had all their authority taken away from them because now the frontline guy is going all the way to the warden for some thing that should be handled by the lieutenant.
Well, it's funny. You mentioned something key, and again, we'll even discuss inmates in this perspective and why inmates have to respect the chain of command. But you mentioned circumventing authority. Now, for those that feel that open door policy can lead to individuals circumventing authority, I actually do agree with that. I agree. If we even look at it from an inmate perspective, inmates will shop around to get the answer that's most favorable to them. And if they can't get it from you, and let's say you're not working, they can't get it from your peers, they will try to go to your supervisor. The supervisor is key into how they're able to direct that power of authority of that officer back. And what I mean by that is anytime an inmate goes around me to my supervisor, that inmate believes that they're going to take my power of authority and just, in my world, and they're going to try to say, you know what, I'm not going to respect your power of authority. I'm going to go above you, especially if this is something that I should be able to handle. Now, what I would expect my supervisor to do is give me that power of authority back by redirecting the inmate back to me and making sure that they've exhausted this level first. And again, if it doesn't conflict with my position. So again, I'm going to go to Dave first on this. You mentioned circumventing authority. Now, whether we're talking about the inmates or frontline staff, what is it about someone that when they go around the frontline staff and they go to that supervisor, what do you mean? How does that circumvent their position of authority?
Most of the time, the reason that this person is using this open door policy is because like you said, they're shopping around. They were given an answer that they didn't want. And so they're just like, well, I'll just go see the warden, the head guy, and I won't bother with any of the rest of the chain of command. And as far as like you're talking about, this also takes place with the inmates. I have my best warden that I ever had. What he would do is he would turn to the officer that is running that unit while he's doing a walkthrough and ask him, has this inmate brought this concern to you? And if the answer to that was no, sir, I've never heard of that, he'll just turn back to the inmate and says, talk to him, and walk away. And I thought that was probably the best way to handle it. And it's the best way to handle it when you're going to the captain over the lieutenant's head, et cetera, et cetera. You know,
right.
Have you addressed this with your lieutenant? No, then go back outside and talk to him.
And that's key. I said, Russ, you believe that's key, right? How the supervisor handles that is what's going to help the officer maintain, or that frontline professional maintain their position of authority, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a person in whatever job they're in, whatever title they're in, needs to learn how to fill that niche and not go beyond it. One of the first things that I instituted when I became a sergeant is as inmates would approach me, I would ask them if they had permission to talk to me. And they would get this, quizzical look on their face because they're not being turned away by other staff to do this. And I would say, do you have permission from your tier officer, your yard officer, to talk to me? And so I would always refer them back. And when I first started that, it was kind of interesting because then I'd have these officers calling me on the phone. What's he saying about you telling him that he has to have permission? I said, yeah, the buck stops with you. If you don't know what the answer is, or if you can't grant it, or you're not sure of it, then by all means, send it up the chain to me, but don't make me have to deal with stuff that you have either the power to deal with or the ability to deal with. So I push it back on them, and that does two things. It invests the officers in being able to understand what their capacity is as an officer, and it keeps the inmates from being chesty toward the officer and always just, well, I'm going to go see the sergeant, or I'm going to go see the lieutenant. But I would tell my lieutenants the same thing. I said, if that inmate comes to see you, you ask if he has permission from me. And if he doesn't have permission from me, I'm going to ask him why he doesn't have permission from his officer, whether it's on his tier or the yard or whatever. And that's what keeps everything intact. It keeps, all the fish in the right order up and down the stream.
Now, even though we seem to be going back and forth between staff and inmates, chain of command is chain of command. We enforce it no different, even with the inmate population. The respect for the chain of command is also respecting that person in that power of authority directly over you. And obviously, people that try to circumvent that chain of command, again, without reason, remember, nothing's 100% here. But for the most part, when you try to circumvent that chain of command, it could be an effort to undermine the individual in that position of authority. And I like what you mentioned, where inmates will be quick to throw around that higher level. So let's say if I was an inmate, and same thing can happen with a problematic employee, and they see that, let's say as a sergeant, I go directly into a unit and the inmates just flock to me, and I receive all their information. I take it down, and without me even going to the frontline officer, I start acting on everything the inmates are saying. It really does put that officer in a very, very bad situation. It just takes away the power from the officer. The officer feels disenfranchised. Now, if that inmate's problematic, the officer may even have an issue presenting their sense of authority to direct the inmate to do something correct, because he's afraid that if the inmate challenges it, he has that open, or she has that open venue to go talk to the higher supervisor. Now, I know, David, I'm sure in the federal system, no different than the state system, how many times have you seen in your career an inmate circumvent the frontline officer, go to the supervisor, and then once that supervisor allows that dialogue to happen without redirecting it to the officer first, the officer starts to become disenfranchised because he knows for a fact that if he goes to give that inmate a directive and the inmate goes to challenge it, you know for a fact that inmate's going to do what? Yeah, I'll go talk to that sergeant.
We used to have the warden, and I believe it's a federal policy. They'll walk through every unit every week, and they come with all their support staff. And what happens is the inmates bring a lot of problems directly to the warden. And then, of course, after the warden leaves, the inmate turns to me and goes, "Ha ha, the warden said you got to do blah, blah, blah." And I would always throw it back and just say, well, the warden promised it to you. Get it from the warden. And I'd go about my business. It's one way to fight back against that when you're, frontline staff. Warden promised it. Let the warden provide it.
Yeah, see, but that's excellent advice, because obviously the inmate's he's trying to use the position of the warden to intimidate you as a frontline professional. That's why, as I said, when you have those supervisors that embrace that communication without really redirecting it to that front line, it really is a disrespect. And then you start seeing officers get frustrated. I'm sure, Russ, you've seen it, where you have officers that are doing their job, and then when they go into a unit and you have a supervisor kind of presenting a bit of a conflict between the officer doing their job, what's expected of them, and then obviously trying to be over popular with the inmates, you get officers that be like, you know what, I'm not even going to enforce the rules anymore, because at the end of the day, the supervisor is going to side with the inmates.
Well, yeah, and that's a huge problem, because what happens is, as officers become frustrated within a system where they don't have the power to impact things in a positive way, then what's left to them? That's when they start to creep outside policy, creep outside procedure, and they feel like the only avenue left open to them are things that exist outside this policy and procedure that administration has created and decided that that's the best thing for them. And meanwhile, administration has put all of this on their shoulders, but while that's sitting on their shoulders, they kick their knees out from underneath them.
Right, and you mentioned that they go outside of policy, and I agree with that, obviously, because sometimes if they want something handled and they feel that management ain't doing it correctly, they're going to find ways to get it done. I mean, that's just the world we live in. But I also feel that some of them may just decide not to do their job at all. So have you ever had people, hey, Dave, in your experience working in the federal system, have you ever had people just so frustrated because they feel that the inmates are able to circumvent their authority, and kind of the higher ups just kind of listen more to the inmates than they do the front line, and just not even care to run their housing unit anymore?
Absolutely. I thought of a specific incident that really illustrates what we're talking about here. Warden comes down and the inmates are complaining, we don't get enough toilet paper, we don't get enough writing paper, and for God's sakes, we never get enough scouring powder. So the warden puts out this big deal, give them all of this that they want, okay? So every housing unit in all of USP Marion kicked out all the toilet paper, all the scouring powder on the range. How about it, boys? Take it all. Well, of course, that lasted about 3 days. Normally, they give us 1 month at a time. So then we all start bugging the warehouse. The warehouse says, look, I've given it all away. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. What happened? Oh, well, the warden owned it. It's his deal. So eventually he came up with things are too lax around here and we got to take back Marion. Well, who the hell gave it away, buddy? You can have your officers acting that way too. Think about what you're telling them. They might just do exactly what you said.
We talked about inmates a little bit, but I also want to talk about us respecting the chain of command. Now, again, as I said, we also have a lot of our own frontline staff. They may have a habit of circumventing their supervisors, sometimes, as I said, for their own benefit. Now, I do believe there has to be a form of communication, don't get me wrong, with upper level and frontline in regards to, understanding what their job is. In my opinion, the difference between open door and making sure it doesn't conflict with chain of command is that when I have open dialogue with my, let's say, front line, it's not in an effort to conflict anything that's already been set by their immediate supervisor. If they try to do that, I do push them back to the supervisor as long as there's not a conflict with the concern. So again, if I'm a frontline employee and I have a problem with my direct supervisor, then it's my right to bring it up to the next level. If I'm the next level, I'm not going to be so quick to push you back, but I want to know what the concern is. But if it's something that, let's say, that wasn't even brought up to that frontline supervisor, and then me as a higher level, I just act on it without letting the officer, telling the officer to go back to your frontline supervisor, make sure they're aware of the concern. I take that as a disrespect to the frontline supervisor because that officer did not bring it to that frontline supervisor's attention, and now I went ahead and acted on it, and unfortunately the supervisor will sit there like, again, I didn't even know anything was wrong. So now what you're doing is you're opening up that door for that officer to go around that immediate supervisor and then bring it to your attention. And I feel that's the point where we begin to really start getting a major conflict between my position, let's say as higher management, and the position of that immediate first line supervisor who needs to be given that chance to lead, who needs to be given that chance to have that sense of authority. Now, Russ, you having that supervisory position, I know that you were a frontline supervisor, right? So you were, let's say, a sergeant, correct?
Yes.
Now, how would you feel? There's a couple of concerns here. I'm not talking about someone that has a problem with you and goes a higher level up. I expect that. It's not personal. If you have a problem with me or decision I made, it's okay. You've exhausted that level. If you want to take it another level up, I've told people to do that. But how do you feel when there's two questions here? When someone goes around you without telling you what that concern is, that's number one. But number two is the reaction of the supervisor that's above you addressing the issue without having brought back to you first.
Yeah, the two huge things there is you can't address and fix something if you don't know about it, obviously. And you should always be given a fair chance to deal with something, just as you should give the person above you a fair chance to deal with whatever it is you're encountering that's causing a problem. But then the second part of that being on that upper level is just being able to ensure that you protect the integrity of that chain of command as much as you can, because there's only certain things that should go around that, and that's security breach, obviously, and violation of policy, procedure, or law, and that's it essentially.
And I like that because I mentioned in my other video that don't take everything as like an automatic break of chain of command. There is some discretion. Like if I'm a higher level supervisor, I have to make sure that by me basically redirecting it back to that frontline individual, that frontline supervisor, that it doesn't conflict with, what their concern is. So again, if I had an officer come up to me saying that he's having problems specifically with his immediate frontline supervisor, it wouldn't be correct to me to send that person back to that supervisor until I saw what that concern was. Or here's another thing I don't like, and maybe Dave, I'll get your opinion on this. If you have an officer that doesn't get along with a supervisor, some higher level supervisors decide to put that officer underneath another supervisor. And I disagree with that. You have to find a way to work that communication out. Have you ever seen that happen, Dave, where like someone comes up and has a problem with a supervisor and higher level, instead of really addressing the concern between them and that supervisor, they decide to reassign the employee to another supervisor?
No, the only instances that I can think of that are it got really personal between a couple of people, and they dragged them into the lieutenant's office, had HR in there with them, and they hashed it out. And we're not leaving this office until this problem is solved. And they solved it enough that they could remain professional. They still didn't like each other, but at that point they were professional acting, and I thought it worked out excellent. I mean, sometimes you got to go to the dentist and have a bad tooth pulled out, and it's going to hurt. That's just what they did. They got it pulled out, they got it taken care of, and it was resolved at that level.
I'll be honest, I'm actually good with that as long as it doesn't turn out to be. Obviously, you got to be careful of EED concerns, especially in today's day and age. But I believe that if you're two professionals, at the end of the day, as long as there's no EED concerns, I am going to wind up putting both parties at the table and have them hash it out, because I'm not going to go ahead and inconvenience everyone else because these two people don't get along. But it's easier for me as a supervisor to go ahead and tell this person, you know what, I'll put you here with this other supervisor, because then you wind up having just these, it could be just a problematic employee. And now what you did is you put someone else's problematic employee under someone else, and now that person could have something smooth and running. So I like what your approach was, is to actually find a way for those two parties to either coexist, but either way, I'm not going to inconvenience everyone else because, you know, you two don't get along. And Russ, in your career, have you ever seen that where you had, maybe it was just two front line, but technically more important, it's the position of authority, where there was a supervisor that just wasn't getting along with their frontline employee, which way it was, and then management found it easier just to say, you know what, instead of even solving this, let's move them around?
Oh yeah, you know, unfortunately, sometimes administration goes with the path of least resistance, you know, and that's another thing that can be unfair to the supervisor in the middle, is because when that person goes around before addressing the situation, then it sets that person up, because this person above them has already heard this story about the way it is, perhaps without regard to the truth, you know. And sometimes, especially when you get the occasional drama queen in there, they get sold and bid on a lot harder than it needs to be.
Right. Now let me ask you a question too. If I'll give this one to Russ first, is if let's say you were another level up. So let's put a supervisor in between you and the frontline employee, right? So let's say the frontline employee came to you, went up a level with a concern, right? Now, this concern should have been brought to the frontline supervisor first, but it wasn't. Would you, as the higher level, bring both parties together for them to discuss it? Or would you send the officer back to the supervisor and let them deal with it?
Oh, I would always return it back down the chain if possible, because I need to keep that person below me invested in the process. Right. Because if they're not, then when the next thing comes along, instead of them handling it, what's the easiest thing for them to do? Well, the easiest thing to do is to kick it back up. And that's when the whole thing starts to come apart at the seams, is when it's no longer functioning and you have the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing.
I'd like to comment on what Russ said there. I think the number one problem in the chain of command dealing with prisons in general is exactly what Russ said. It's the tendency of a lot of the administration to take the least resistance, handle it for today, and to hell with tomorrow. That's where you end up with that, hey boss, we ain't got no toilet paper because you told us to give it all out. You know, we end up with things like that, and it does that way with personnel actions too. Well, he don't get along with that guy, so we'll separate him for a little while, and then pretty soon we've got staff with separatees. He can't work there, so we got to do the. It gets too damn complicated, and it's all from the attitude of handle it for right now, and then we can forget about this, and it comes back and bites you later.
And you know what's sad is me and Russ had this discussion before, where the higher level, those executive staffs, they're not really in the position long enough to really see the ripple effect, where frontline is always going to have that longevity. So, they're good for just today because they may not be there tomorrow. But for us, we want more investment. It's great to see. I know some people well, it's too young to get that high of power, but that being young may have some consistency in that upper level for a while, as opposed to those that reach for those positions towards the end of their career, and then you get a lot of changes going on, and the front line winds up getting affected the most. You get settled for this, and at this point, a new leader comes in. The first thing they change is something that you just got settled into, and the inconsistency is horrible. And again, that deals again with communication, obviously, and just, you know, when one person's leaving, you know, can we at least talk about the stuff that's been working before you just go ahead and reinvent the wheel? Like, I do like supervisors that do walk around and don't try to implement anything until they really have an understanding of that facility. And I'll be honest with you, you know, that's an understanding that doesn't come overnight. You know, one of the concerns that when I was talking to my friend on the phone was, we were talking about, again, respecting the chain of command. We were having a great conversation on the phone. And one of the things that she mentioned was that she doesn't want to be, this is where we're going to get the advice here. She wants to know what's going on in her department. She wants frontline to be able to go to her, but she doesn't want it to be done in a manner that conflicts with the authority that her supervisors have.
Well, yeah, you know, if someone wants to engage in that kind of dialogue, they're going to find that sometimes their mere presence taints the effect, so to speak. And you don't want that. What a person like that should look for, or to try and get involved with, is to have someone take notes of different people's concerns, go around the room, list some things out and name them out, and then bring them to her. Because what can happen, and when I talk about tainting it, there's all kinds of things that take place. There's egos that are involved, there's vendettas at play, there's showboating, and there's ass kissing. Well, if you take at least one level of that away, you might get to something that more approaches the truth, in my estimation.
I like that. What about you, Dave? What do you think?
We had a system for at least a little while, and I thought it worked the best for this kind of thing. It was a system where any employee would fill out this form, and the form asked a lot of questions on it about what is the problem, what is your solution, those kinds of things. And we had people put in things like, you know, I think that there ought to be a drinking fountain out on the yard for the inmates because we got these little paper cups floating all over the place. So a supervisor who doesn't get to talk to the warden, who you know, he'd have the ability to make this suggestion. It was taken to a committee. All the department heads would discuss it, and then they would pass on any recommendations for action to the warden, and then it was taken care of that way. And if the employee actually saved the Bureau money, he got a monetary award for it. I thought it worked very well. It cut out a lot of the, you know, the showboating, ass-kissing bullshit, because you're not able to do it in person.
Right. And you know what's funny, guys, as we come to a close, there's no time that we're saying here that we don't want the higher level talking to the front line. It's not about that, but it can't be done in a manner that takes away the power of the immediate supervisor. So we're talking about people that are just circumventing the chain of command for whatever personal reasons. And again, we talked about discretion. We talked about maybe there obviously are some times where that chain of command has to be broken, and management has to be receptive of that in case there is a conflict with that immediate supervisor. The focus of the discussion here is circumventing it just to get personal gain, and ultimately how management reacts to that really determines, unfortunately, that immediate supervisor's position of authority. If I don't defer it back, I'm taking away the position of authority from that immediate supervisor, and that can happen from just the inmate to the frontline officer to the sergeant. If the sergeant's receptive to the inmate without having the inmate going to the officer, and they don't send the inmate back to the officer, the sergeant literally is taking away the power of the officer to run that unit effectively. And I would also like to say on a higher level, when you have officers circumventing their immediate supervisor to get to the higher level. And again, it's all for personal gain. So it's good to have a conversation like this, because I know people are thinking like, oh, open door policy is a conflict of chain of command. It's not. It's really two different things, because having an open door policy could mean I'm approachable. I come down, hey, how's the family? How's the kids? How's this? How's that? I'm good with that. You know, I want to know my employees. But if you're coming to me every time you have a problem with your supervisor and it's just to circumvent their power of authority, that's not an open door policy. I'm going to send you right back to that person, and you're going to have to tell them and figure it out. And again, exhaust that level before you bring it up. But at the end of the day, there is some discretion. We talked about that before, where there are certain concerns where you can break that level of authority. But again, for the most part here, if you're trying to circumvent the system and you're coming to that higher level, and that higher level sends you back, they're not in violation of open door policy. They're just telling you, go back and follow the chain of command. So guys, in closing, you have anything you want to say to my audience? Russ, you want to go first?
Whether you're bottom position line staff, or whether you're a lieutenant or captain or above, be mindful of what your place in the stream is, and understand how you disturb things when you swim outside of those bounds. Think about how it affects the lower staff. Think about how it affects the people above you, and just give it some thought and think about what you're doing. Be mindful.
What do you got, Dave?
I just got a suggestion. If you want to hear just plain old stories of an old hack that just tells stories like you'll sit across from me on a table and sip a cup of coffee, then go to As the Key Turns. If what you're really concerned about is your career, then Keepers of Chaos and Anthony's channel are exactly the places that you need to find that kind of advice.
Well, thank you. By the way, I'm a fan for what both you guys are doing. Russ, obviously, Keeper of Chaos, getting ready to form that network, trying to figure out what we want to do with those followers, because I know we're talking about conferences and really bringing that community to the outside. I know you have an entertaining channel, but there's a lot to learn from what you offer. So you've actually created this great balance where you're entertaining, bitterly honest, but there's so much knowledge to gain from someone that's been in the field, walked the walk, and survived it. You know, you deserve success the moment you had your first video up. So I hope that success continues. I hope we're able to do future shows. And I really feel this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship with all of us. So again, thank you guys for coming on Tier Talk. And guys, if you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. All right, guys, stay safe.